John Cena versus The Show.
Hulk Hogan and The Rock in the same ring. You will never take my place at the head of the table.
Taker on the Hell's Gate submission. Oh my God!
Shawn Michaels just kicked Cena's head off. It'll be The Rock. It'll be Austin one-on-one. Do you believe in miracles?
The streak is over.
Hey, what's going on, guys, and welcome back to WWE Retro on the WWE podcast on December 9th. As we are in December, as I just said, all stating the obvious, and it feels like the first time in forever, and probably in the history of WWE, that we are not getting a pay-per-view in December. Most notably between Royal Rumble and Survivor Series. And technically last year we didn't have one as well, although we did have the Day 1 pay-per-view. And I had long been thinking, because I really enjoyed the pay-per-view last year, Day 1. And I was saying, like, why are they doing it again this year? Like, I really like Day 1, this, that, and everything. And then I remembered, well, they can't have it every year on January 1st, because January 1st doesn't always fall on a Saturday or a Sunday. And now that Premier Live events have been permanently shifted to Saturdays, it makes sense why they couldn't have it another Day 1 pay-per-view this year. So, I do hope they maybe re-look to explore something like that, like a New Year's Evolution or something like it, because I do like having December pay-per-views, although only when they're worthy. Which, I mean, a lot of the times over the last decade plus or so, we had been accustomed to the TLC pay-per-view, which was one of the worst pay-per-views in my opinion. And we had the infamous December to Dismember pay-per-view back in, I believe it was 2006, the first and maybe only ECW brand exclusive pay-per-view that was just a complete flop with the Extreme Rules Elimination Chamber. But there was also one way back in the day, and I'm kind of aging myself here. I believe it's a pay-per-view that has been discontinued since 2008, if I'm not mistaken, by the name of Armageddon, that had long been considered to be the December pay-per-view. And in 2003, specifically, it was a Raw exclusive pay-per-view. And it flip-flopped a bit, you know, before this it had just become a universal pay-per-view, back when there was no brand exclusive pay-per-views. And in the later years, it would shift over to being a SmackDown pay-per-view. Vengeance did the same thing. It started off as a SmackDown pay-per-view and then went over to Monday Night Raw. So they kind of flip-flopped Vengeance and Armageddon. But Armageddon 2003 was a very, I guess, intriguing time in WWE, because you were just about a year and a half into the brand extension. You were 6 months removed, or more than that actually, more like 8 months removed, from The Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin hanging up their boots as full-time competitors in a wrestling ring. And you had Evolution really starting to catch fire. And, you know, a few weeks ago I covered the Triple H Reign of Terror, and one of his title, I guess, wins came at this very pay-per-view. So, spoiler alert, that is the main event of this pay-per-view. But if you listen to this show semi-regularly, you would have known that already. But it was so much more than that, because this pay-per-view was one that really furthered a lot of what was going on the Monday Night Raw brand, specifically with Evolution. And you look at this card, and for a brand exclusive pay-per-view, it was something that, or it's an example rather, that you can really make a brilliant pay-per-view without all the star power in the world. Because you look over on SmackDown's roster at this time, and you had the likes of The Undertaker, you had the likes of Kurt Angle, Brock Lesnar, Eddie Guerrero, Chris Benoit. Like, it was an absolutely stacked roster over on SmackDown, arguably more so than over on Monday Night Raw. I think Monday Night Raw probably had the better supporting cast, but in terms of the star power, SmackDown absolutely had the advantage. And you look at the first match on the night, which was Sunday Night Heat, and you have Rico defeat John Heidenreich in a minute and a half. And I don't know if you guys remember Heidenreich. He would later go on to be known as just Heidenreich. And he would kind of really get his only push over on SmackDown. He was kind of like a Nazi type of character, if I'm not mistaken. And then he would eventually have a program with The Undertaker that kind of flopped. And his biggest claim to fame is when he rebooted the Legion of Doom with a returning Animal and went on a run with the tag team titles. Then on the first match of the night on the actual pay-per-view, you have Booker T defeat Mark Henry, accompanied to the ring by Theodore Long in 10 minutes and 20 seconds. And you have Booker T here who is kind of lost in no man's land. It was just 8 months prior that he was challenging Triple H for the World Heavyweight Championship over at WrestleMania 19, a very infamous storyline and arguably one of the worst booking decisions from an objective standpoint. I've already talked about that I actually support Booker T not winning the World Championship at this point in time. But it just goes to show that how, I guess, down the food chain Booker T was at this point in time. And not long after this, he would form a tag team with Rob Van Dam because they really didn't have much going for him. And speaking of Rob Van Dam, he was the Intercontinental Champion during this period of time. And he would go in to the Armageddon 2003 pay-per-view to defend his championship against Randy Orton. A Randy Orton who was in his early 20s at the time, one of the prodigies in the WWE, on screen, the chosen one by Evolution's Ric Flair and Triple H. And it was Ric Flair who would accompany him to the ring and help give Randy Orton arguably his biggest victory to date. And with Mick Foley as the special guest referee, it was kind of the initial way to kind of start building towards Mick Foley versus Randy Orton that would ultimately culminate at Backlash 2004. And along the way, you had the handicap tag match between Evolution and the Rock and Saw Connection at WrestleMania 20. So this was really a launching pad moment for Randy Orton, who was obviously being fast-tracked to the main event. And in a lot of ways here, you kind of saw them planting seeds for what we would see of Randy Orton for the next decade plus, Randy Orton would become one of the faces of the company in the late 2000s. I think in the early to mid 2010s, he really kind of took a step back aside from that run with the Authority from 2013 to 2014. But it's just crazy to go back and look and see that Armageddon 2003 really was one of the first times we saw Randy Orton get fast-tracked onto that racetrack. I guess that's a terrible analogy, guys. Sorry, I'm tired. I'm fighting a cold too. But it's just crazy that it all started at an Armageddon pay-per-view. And I've talked about this a lot lately, that like B-level pay-per-views, if executed properly, could be so well utilized. Because it feels like for the last several years, probably even decade plus, that B-level pay-per-views were just kind of there as a money grab for WWE. Nothing major would happen. A lot of times the world titles wouldn't even be defended. But this is an example of how, when you really go look back at the storied career of Randy Orton, it all really got put into the fifth gear at Armageddon in 2003. And defeating Rob Van Dam for the Intercontinental Championship, as JR said, his first WWE title. I thought it was so cool that it all took place at like a non-Royal Rumble, a non-SummerSlam, a non-WrestleMania. So always, if you ever want to know where Randy Orton really got his first big break, you go back and look at this contest against Rob Van Dam. And again, you see the first kind of breadcrumbs of his program with Mick Foley. And then you get a match and before we move on, this match went 18 minutes. So a very long match and a big opportunity for Randy Orton and Rob Van Dam to showcase what they had. And then in a match kind of the times, you get Chris Jericho and Christian defeating Lita and Trish Stratus in an intergender match. And I gotta say, imagine if this match would have taken place in the present time. So another example of them starting a program that would ultimately lead into WrestleMania. Because we have Chris Jericho, who was just a full-blown over-the-top heel for over 2 years at this point. Once again tagging with his best friend Christian, who had been together for about a year. And they go up against Lita and Trish in the Battle of the Sexes, put into place by then heel general manager Eric Bischoff. And then you see Chris Jericho caring about Trish. And once Christian gets the roll-up pin on Trish, you see the conflict in Jericho's eyes. And as JR put it, actually acting like he cared. And this was the slow babyface turn of Chris Jericho. And one that would ultimately lead into his WrestleMania contest against Christian. Lo and behold, at WrestleMania 20, Trish would turn heel on Chris Jericho, align with Christian, help Christian get the win, and then she would make out with Christian on the top of the stage after their contest at WrestleMania 20. But it was the slow babyface turn of Chris Jericho, one that I think that was really a long time coming, as like I said, he had been a heel for well over 2 years to this point. So once again, a B-level pay-per-view presenting breadcrumbs that would ultimately lead into a big-time program leading up into WrestleMania 20. And I just think that it's another example of how these B-level pay-per-views could really help further bigger storylines on bigger pay-per-views later down the line. Then we have Shawn Michaels defeat the Batista with Ric Flair again in 12 and a half minutes. Batista at this point, I mean, he had gotten involved with Goldberg a bit along the way. He was fresh off from coming back from injury. And I think Batista was still kind of finding his way as a solo character. He was just kind of like the big meathead heavy for Evolution at this point. And having the one-on-one match with Shawn Michaels was a good opportunity to kind of showcase him, although he did get the loss. And this match was built off of Batista's interference at the 5-on-5 Survivor Series match between Team Bischoff and Team Austin just a month prior, when Batista would interfere on behalf of Team Bischoff, powerbombing Shawn Michaels and helping Randy Orton score the victory for Team Bischoff. But he would lose this big contest, or relatively speaking, a big contest for him. And I would say that at this point, this was probably Batista's most notable singles match against Shawn Michaels at Armageddon 2003, even though it was in a losing effort. Then we have the tag team turmoil, where we had 6 teams competing for the Dudley Boys' World Championships. So, first off, we had La Resistance of Rob Conway and Rene Dupree against Rosie and the Hurricane. Rosie and the Hurricane would eliminate La Resistance. Entering number 3, we would have Mark Jindrak and Garrison Cade, who would take out Rosie and the Hurricane in 3.5 minutes. Entering next was Val Venus and Lance Storm, who would also be eliminated by Mark Jindrak and Garrison Cade at the 7-minute and 17 mark. Then coming in for the 4th, sorry, I'm kind of losing track of all these names, would be the Dudley Boys of Bubba Ray and Devon, who would take out Jindrak and Garrison Cade. And then finally, we would have Test and Scott Steiner enter last, and they also would lose to the Dudley Boys in 16.5 minutes. But just when we thought that the Dudley Boys had successfully defended their World Tag Team Championships, Eric Bischoff had other plans.
Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce to you Batista and the Nature Boy, Ric Flair! What the hell is this? I thought there were 6 teams in tag team turmoil. This will be the 7th team. And the division has literally been decimated. Well, I'm thinking, maybe we're in the mystery. And there's just nobody in hell who will think that the division can withstand this ugly of a
So Batista and Ric Flair, as the surprise final entrance into tag team turmoil, take advantage of a beaten and battered Dudley Boys and win the World Tag Team titles. And again, another major moment at Armageddon 2003, a quote B-level pay-per-view, where you had Ric Flair, who had been back in WWE for 2 years, win his first championship since re-entering the WWE. And you have Batista finally kind of find his niche on the Raw roster as well, winning his first championship, although the tag team title. So you really find a way to make everyone in that Evolution kind of lower card aside from Triple H feel important on this pay-per-view and put them in significant matches and significant situations. So you have really Evolution to this point really dominating this pay-per-view with still Triple H left to compete. Before we get to there, we have Molly Holly, the WWE Women's Champion, successfully defend her title against Ivory in 4 minutes and 23 seconds before getting to the main event of then World Heavyweight Champion Goldberg defending his championship against Triple H and Kane in a triple threat match for the World Heavyweight title, and a match that would ultimately culminate in the Night of Shine for Evolution.
But somehow all three of them still on their feet. Getting that Kane, a double clothesline. Man, that is raw power and emotion. The will to win here by Goldberg, who has dodged every bullet that has been shot at him here in the WWE. He's been double teamed all night by Triple H in this spot for Kane. But he's still spear on Kane. The second spear on Kane. Kane taken down and Goldberg. I don't think even Kane can set up for that. Goldberg having a hard time standing, but he is standing. Oh, God. Goldberg gets him on his line here. The spear again. Just like a Survivor Series. Revolution. This is the numbers qualification match. Randy Orton and Intercontinental Champion. H is actually in the ring. And Goldberg again, taking down the King. There's a cover. It's going to be over. It's going to be over. King. Hard, clubbing, sickening blow in the back of Goldberg's head. Now look at this carnage, JR. The body's all over the ring and around the ring. Well, we got to get some security out here. Get Flair and Orton the hell out of here. Goldberg sending Kane to the right. The game is down. And now Goldberg. They're trying to touch that Kane, but don't tell me help him out. Goldberg can't do this, I don't think. Goldberg trying to choke Kane out. There's another disqualification match. But the leverage advantage here is with a 7-foot Kane. Who's going to blink? I don't know. Who's going to blink here? Goldberg with
Thanks for listening to
So
the
Evolution
WWE podcast.
would have all the gold
Don't forget
here
to subscribe on
by
your
the
favorite
end
podcast app.
of Armageddon
So you don't miss a
2003.
show. Or head to
And it would come to be known as the Evolution
And for all
Night
of
of
these
Shine.
shows ad-free,
And
head over to
a massive example as to
patreon.com/WWE
why
podcast.
This
Until
was
then,
such an important
we'll see
pay-per-view
you
and why I
next
do, in
time.
some subjective way, think that there should be a December pay-per-view. Because when executed properly, it could be damn well awesome. And the amount of storylines they furthered through all this pay-per-view was brilliant storytelling. You know, you had Kane, who had just really started on this monster run, the pay-per-view before he had buried his own brother, The Undertaker. And this was kind of the first stubbing of his toe that really would send him down a crazy path leading into WrestleMania 20. You get the championship back on Triple H, although he had just lost it, 3 months prior. And then all the stuff with Randy Orton and Mick Foley, and Randy Orton becoming the youngest Intercontinental Champion to ever win the title. And then you get the titles on Batista and Ric Flair and give them some legitimacy and not just kind of tag-alongs and the meatheads and the guy of yesteryear in the otherwise dominant Evolution group. And it was just such a brilliant way of giving some fans a reason to watch a non-Big Four pay-per-view. And I think that if WWE goes back to this method, it would really kind of help them out here. Because, look, there's B-level pay-per-views that aren't always going to be knocked out of the park. And there are some that lately I think have been better. Like, I thought Extreme Rules was by and large a decent pay-per-view. The last B-level pay-per-view we've seen. But this business of not having world titles defended or, you know, world titles never changing hands at B-level pay-per-views is something that I think kind of does them a disservice because it kind of tips the hand of WWE and creative before the fans even come to watch it. They know that nothing major is going to happen. They know there's going to be no major shift in the storyline. They know that nothing huge is going to change in the terms of the course towards a bigger platform like a WrestleMania or a SummerSlam. And Armageddon 2003 is a prime example of how that doesn't always have to be the case. And now that I'm thinking of it, when is the last time we saw a world championship change at a B-level pay-per-view? You know when that was? It was when Roman Reigns won the title back in 2020. Was it Payback or Backlash? When they had the pay-per-view 1 week separated from SummerSlam, You'll Never See It Coming, which is when he returned. So it just goes to show you that B-level pay-per-views can present amazing platforms for huge championship changes or storyline shifts or changes in course of where certain programs are heading. And we saw it not too long ago with Roman Reigns winning the Universal Championship 2.5 years ago at a B-level pay-per-view. And look, I mean, the next B-level pay-per-view, if you want to call it that, will be the Elimination Chamber in my hometown of Montreal. Still haven't bought tickets. The prices are pretty absurd. Gonna try and find some on the secondary market, but I mean, with Christmas rolling around, I don't know if I have $300-400 laying around of disposable income, but we'll definitely try. Now, on a side note, could you believe it's the first pay-per-view to be held in Montreal since 2009? Breaking point? Absolutely crazy. But all in all, to get back on track and kind of put a bow on this episode, Armageddon 2003 was a brilliant example of how B-level pay-per-views can really be A-level shows. But anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed it because that's all I got for you today. As always, you can follow me on Twitter at ADemarco25. You can follow Matt on Twitter at wrestling_audio. Or you can email him each and every week for the WWE podcast mailbag. Anyway, guys, enjoy your weekend. Try and go watch some B-level pay-per-views on the network and get back to me on which other ones maybe I should cover. And I'll talk to you next week.